Pokrovsk is turning into a place where an attack can die before it even becomes a battle. A small Russian push can look normal for 5 seconds, and then the sky decides the ending. No big breakthrough on the map is needed because the real weapon here is a chain that links eyes, coordinates, and fire in one tight loop. The shock is not the size of the force, since numbers can be replaced. The shock is how fast a moving formation becomes a fixed target the moment it steps out of the truck and tries to spread out. This is what low sky warfare means. Because drones do not just strike, they control time, movement, and fear. Reports keep pointing to Pokrovsk as one of the most active pressure points on the front, where attacks repeat, losses stack, and every kilometer has a price. And once air reconnaissance starts reading patterns instead of silhouettes, hiding stops being protection and turns into a delay. If this kind of clear battlefield reporting matters, like the video, share it and subscribe to World War History, because the next minutes show how this trap is built. Now the story moves to the opening pattern because it always starts the same way, and it rarely ends the same way. Around Pokrovsk, the assault starts with a scene that looks routine. A cargo truck breaks at the edge of danger. Infantry spill out into the tree-lined or rubble, and a light armored vehicle still keeps rolling forward to probe the first trench line. This drop and push method repeats because the battlefield there punishes mass moves. So, Russian units try to advance in small packets, test Ukrainian reactions, and hunt for a thin seam rather than betting everything on one loud thrust. Daily situation updates from Ukraine's military leadership have repeatedly described the Pokrovsk direction as one of the hottest sectors with a high share of combat engagements and repeated assault attempts in the area. That rhythm matters because it shows an operational choice. Keep pressure constant, rotate short attacks, and force defenders to reveal firing points, drone teams, and reserves through frequent contact instead of a single breakthrough gamble. In theory, the truck is a taxi and the armored vehicle is a shield. But in practice, both are part of a timed drill that tries to turn minutes into momentum before defenders can lock the approach. The problem is that the most fragile moment is not when the infantry fires, but when it simply unfolds. Because the instant the transport stops, men fan out, shoulder weapons, and adjust gear. And those tiny movements create a signature that is easy to spot from above. Aerial scouts do not need to see faces since they read motion, spacing, tracks, and repeated routes. And once the pattern is confirmed, the deployment zone stops being a safe rear edge and becomes a marked coordinate in a drone-led fight. This is where the modern trap closes because drones can linger, hand off targets, and wait for the exact second when the group is spread wide enough to be hit, but not organized enough to sprint away. Ukrainian briefings also point to heavy drone activity across the front, which helps keep this overhead net tight. A light armored vehicle pushing forward does not solve that exposure since its engine noise and dust trail can act like a beacon, and its presence often pulls fire toward the very infantry it was supposed to cover. Even when the vehicle survives the first contact, the dismounts behind it are forced into a broken tempo with short dashes, sudden freezes, and split-second choices that shred unit control before the first trench is even reached. In many frontline videos and field accounts, the decisive damage comes during that messy transition when a team is half moving and half hiding, and when a single FPV strike or mortar burst can break the group into isolated pairs. Once cohesion is lost, the assault stops being a planned push and becomes a series of individual survival problems, which is exactly the outcome a defender wants when drones and observation are already shaping the ground. So the real investigative detail is simple, but brutal. The truck's stop line is not just a line on a map. It is a predictable human moment, and in a sky full of cameras, it can be more lethal than the trench itself. That is why Pokrovsk's repeated truck drop armor probe scenes are not proof of creativity, but proof that both sides are trapped in a cycle where the approach phase is the easiest part to detect and the hardest part to protect. And that tension sets up what happens when the next small group tries the same road again. Ukraine's fire response around Pokrovsk is built as a sequence, not a single burst. And it starts the moment the truck stops and the dismount begins. Artillery and drones hit together with priority on the transport first, because a burning truck is an instant cut to withdrawal options, and a sudden break in any immediate resupply. Ukrainian daily situation reports have described the Pokrovsk sector as one of the most intense, with dozens of assaults in a day and heavy drone activity across the front. That context explains why the first strike is often aimed at mobility and timing, not at the deepest trench, and it sets the tone for what follows. Once the truck is disabled, the tactical loss is larger than a vehicle because it removes the rhythm of the assault and erases the point where scattered troops can regroup. A group that expected to remount, reposition, or pick up extra ammunition is forced into a walking fight under observation, and spacing turns from a choice into a problem. This fragmentation is visible in how defenders describe the battle, where contact can shift to building-by-building pressure and small unit infiltration. While drones help track and punish movement, the assault still exists, but it arrives in pieces, and pieces are easier to isolate under modern surveillance. The second phase is the funnel, where fire shifts from the ruined transport to the shelter points that infantry instinctively chooses, such as sheds, basement, culverts, and half-collapsed houses. Those structures look safe from ground level, yet they are often pre-mapped landmarks, and drones can hold in orbit enough to confirm which door is used and which wall is newly broken. When coordinates are fixed, a hiding place turns into a reference point for follow-on strikes, whether that means indirect fire, a loitering munition, or a fast FPV hit. The space that was meant to absorb danger becomes the address that guides danger back in. This approach fits a broader pattern described by outside assessments, where the fight is shaped by reconnaissance, suppression, and interdiction of routes as much as by classic artillery duels. ISW assessments in January 2026 have repeatedly noted continued Russian attacks in the Pokrovsk direction, while also emphasizing the role of drones and the contest over logistics and movement. Ukraine's top commander says Russia plans a drone output increase, which raises strike density near Pokrovsk. Reuters reporting from late 2025 also highlighted that Pokrovsk's battle lines can be unclear, and that drones are central but not sufficient alone, because infantry numbers and supply routes still decide whether ground is held. That mix creates a battlefield where the decisive contest is often about who can move under watch without being fixed in place. The key point is that once shelters are struck by coordinates, concealment stops being defense and becomes only a delay, because the sky can keep the target owned even when it is not visible. A pause inside a building can buy seconds, but it also buys the observer time to refine angles, confirm patterns, and cue the next hit. And that is why stillness can be punished as hard as movement. In the Pokrovsk sector, the sequence is designed to turn any attempt to disappear into a countdown, with fire returning until the position is abandoned or silent. That is how a basic troop drop turns into a controlled elimination cycle, and it pushes the story toward what happens when armored support tries to break that trap. Order breaks first at Pokrovsk because the moment an assault loses a shared clock, it stops being an operation and turns into scattered people trying not to die. When links fail between infantry, armor, and drone cover, each small group begins to solve the fight alone, and attacking by numbers becomes a pile of isolated moves that can be handled one by one. Smoke, ruined streets, weak radio relay, and electronic pressure all help that breakdown, since even a short delay can leave one element exposed while another is still waiting for a signal that never arrives. Ukrainian General Staff updates keep showing why this sector is a grinder, with days reporting well over 100 combat engagements across the front, and Pokrovsk listed as the most difficult zone, including figures like 35 repelled assaults in a single day. The same summary described heavy airstrikes and thousands of kamikaze drone attacks in a day, which helps explain why any formation that lingers or hesitates can be punished quickly. High-frequency pressure can look like strength. Yet, it also increases the chance that one missed cue or one jammed channel will snap the entire push, which is why coordination becomes the real currency here. This is where defense shifts from firepower to system and practice, because the side that can see, decide, and strike faster by only a few minutes can turn a mass assault into a time failure. A defender does not need to destroy every attacker at once, since it is enough to break the sequence. Force pauses, and create separate pockets that cannot support each other under observation. Reports from the Pokrovsk area also describe chaotic and unclear front lines with drones shaping what can move and what must freeze, even while commanders warned that drones alone cannot hold ground without organized infantry and supply. That balance matters because it shows that the winning edge is not a single weapon, but the chain that connects sensors, commanders, and shooters into one fast loop. A Reuters report on an unusually large mechanized attack described months of Russian pressure by small infantry groups around the city, which matches the pattern of grinding forward rather than breaking through in one clean wave. ISW assessments in mid-January 2026 similarly described continued offensive operations in the Pokrovsk direction without confirmed advances, which is the signature of efforts spent for limited ground. That pattern is not random, because a force that cannot keep elements synchronized tends to spend manpower to buy meters, and meters do not always add up to momentum. For an American audience used to big pushes on maps, the uncomfortable lesson is that coordination can outweigh mass, because the timeline between dismount, smoke, electronic cover, and supporting fire is now measured in minutes, not hours. Ukraine's top commander has warned that Russia plans to expand drone output dramatically, even speaking of a target of 1,000 drones per day. And that kind of volume makes timing errors punishable at scale. If infantry steps forward before electronic cover is active, drones can lock the movement. If armor moves without screened lanes, it becomes a beacon. If support fire arrives late, the assault is already broken into pieces. When these gaps appear, the fight does not end with one explosion, since it continues as a hunt where each fragment is tracked, fixed, and hit and turn. And that is how modern defense turns small mistakes into collapse. When resistance collapses, the fight does not end with a flag raised, because it ends with a quiet checklist in the air and a careful walk on the ground. A drone stays over the pocket and looks for the last signs of order, like return fire or a leader trying to regroup men behind cover. Only after the sky confirms that contact is thin do Ukrainian infantry teams step forward, because control with low risk is the point, and that logic opens the clearing phase. This is why the last shots often come from above, not from the doorway. The entry is slow since danger changes from open gunfire to hidden threats such as mines at doorways or a late strike on a predictable path. Small groups move with spacing check angles and keep the drone above watching flanks and rear, so surprises are harder to build. Many sweeps end with only a few prisoners because most attackers are already gone, broken, or unable to coordinate a surrender in time. That small number still matters because it suggests the defense was not pushed back. It was dismantled at the point of contact. And that point leads to why taking ground without a big fight is valuable. Holding an area without a large firefight is not a soft outcome, because it signals the opponent lost the ability to organize local defense, even for minutes. If a unit cannot set a stable firing line, cannot rotate teams, and cannot call support in a clean sequence, then any position becomes temporary, even if it looks strong on a map. This is the gap between a planned pullback and a loss of cohesion, since a planned retreat keeps structure and roots, while a collapse leaves stragglers in abandoned gear. Modern war rewards this kind of low-cost control because it saves ammunition, limits casualties, and frees manpower for the next pressure point. And that is the bridge into the Pokrovsk reality. Around Pokrovsk, the front behaves like a grinding belt with repeated micro-assaults, brief counter-moves, and constant probing for small openings instead of one decisive clash. In that environment, the side that can break one attack cycle and then lock the area quickly gains more than meters, because it denies the enemy a chance to reset inside the same ruins. Fast control also helps manage fatigue, since units can mark hazards, rebuild observation, and rotate through cleared blocks before the next wave arrives. It is a practical way to hold land when the tempo is high, because every extra hour of close fighting drags drones and artillery into the same small square, and that pressure sets up what happens on the withdrawal routes. Once the forward pocket is cleaned, the most profitable phase for FPV teams often begins, because broken attackers rarely leave in a neat column. They exit in singles and pairs along tree lines, drainage ditches, and shattered streets, and they carry the stress of the collapse in their posture and speed. That is when an operator can pick targets that matter, like a radio man or a medic, and one hit can turn a fragile escape into panic. Retreat paths also create funnels at bends, bridges, and gaps in rubble, so a small strike can block movement and expose the rest to follow on fire. So, the story does not end at the cleared position because the hunt continues behind it, and that is where the low sky often collects its biggest return. When the assault breaks, the escape becomes a moving target, and FPV teams treat every retreat path like a shooting lane. Russian troops try to slip out on quad bikes, on motorcycles, and on foot through tree lines and open fields, because speed feels like the only armor left. Ukrainian releases have shown drone pilots striking light vehicle convoys in the Pokrovsk area, including groups moving on quad bikes, which matches the shift from columns to scattered runs. The chase works because the camera stays close. The operator corrects course in real time, and the hit is aimed at the engine, or the one person holding the group together. A run that looks hidden from ground level can still be plain from above, and that gap in perspective feeds the wider trap. Personal camouflage fails in this phase because tracking reads motion and routine, not just shape and color. Anti-drone cloaks, bushes, and abandoned buildings can hide a body for a moment, yet the overhead watch learns where people enter, where they pause, and which routes repeat after every failed push. Reporting on the Pokrovsk fight has described longer-range FPV systems and waiter tactics along ground lines of communication that restrict movement and logistics, so the threat can wait at the choke point instead of searching. So concealment becomes delay, and delay gives the operator time to tighten the lock. The hunt then expands from exposed runners to the places they try to cling to because a broken unit still needs a corner to breathe. UAVs circle for dugouts, trench roofs, basement, and the back rooms of shattered houses, since those spots become the new start line for another attempt or another drone launch. Ukrainian reporting near Pokrovsk has described drones turning roads into piles of destroyed vehicles, then waiting for recovery teams to arrive and striking those follow-on targets, which shows how persistence replaces surprise. The same account notes strikes against enemy pilot antennas, which points to a second goal, namely blinding the opposing drone network so it cannot answer back. When hide sites and operator points are exposed, the attacker loses both shelter and initiative, and that shift pushes the fight toward logistics. That is why the campaign focus settles on transport and movement routes, because every vehicle destroyed is a broken delivery, a delayed assault window, and a smaller threat to the front line in the same night for the defenders by dawn. Ukrainian general staff summaries have described very high tempo in the Pokrovsk direction and massive drone use in a day, including reports of over 3,500 kamikaze drone attacks and 35 assaults repelled, which frames why cutting roads matters at scale. When a supply van burns on the road, wounded evacuation slows, ammunition runs thin, and commanders spend time solving traffic problems instead of shaping the attack. Recovery efforts become bait. Road junctions become kill points. And the safest move for the attacker can be to stop moving, which is exactly what the defender wants. This pressure also has a strategic edge, because the drone war is expanding in volume and speed, so the side that interrupts flow early can save lives later. Ukraine's top commander has warned that Russia is expanding strike drone production and even aims for output of up to 1,000 drones per day, while also citing current daily SHIED production figures, which signals that the air threat will stay heavy. In that environment, destroying one truck can prevent several follow-on contacts since the missing fuel, radios, and shells never reach the line to create the next wave. So the FPV hunt is not a side story because it turns retreat into attrition, turns shelter into a coordinate, and turns logistics into the real front of the battle. The Pokrovsk story exposes a cold shift, because this war is moving from breaking a line to breaking a chain, where reconnaissance, artillery, FPV, and infantry connect like one loss-making assembly line. If Russia cannot disrupt that chain, then each classic assault will keep getting slowed at the dismount point, then hunted in fragments on the exit routes, and finally drained by logistics cuts until pressure on the defense becomes unstable and uneven. If Ukraine can keep the detect-intercept-control rhythm, then Posers may become a template for the next drone phase where the road network matters as much as trenches and where minutes decide outcomes more than kilometers. The key signal to watch is not only the daily map, because the deeper question is, which side can hold the low sky longer, since that advantage sets the real pace of attrition on the ground. So the headline is not just who advances, but who can keep the chain running without a break. And that is the part many quick updates miss. In the days ahead, watch the drone-to-shell ratio, the recovery losses on roads, and the tempo of small assaults, because these reveal the true trend. If this kind of clear battlefield reporting matters, subscribe to W War History like the video, and share it so more people can follow what is really shaping the fight.